So Melanie is the Chief Marketing Officer of Serta Simmons Bedding, and she also leads SSB's innovation team. Melanie has an extensive marketing background across multiple categories and disciplines within consumer packaged goods. She has a track record for building high-performing teams, developing long-term strategies, and consistently architecting and executing turnarounds on declining, maturing businesses. Most recently, Melanie was the Vice President of Marketing at Kraft Heinz Corporation, where she was responsible for a $4 billion portfolio. And prior to Kraft Heinz, Melanie held brand management roles at Kimberly-Clark and Unilever. So we're super excited to welcome you, Melanie.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So to begin, I'd like to have you share a little bit more about your personal career journey with the audience. So what drove you to where you are today, and what makes you most passionate about the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. As we were getting ready for this talk, we were thinking about how do you pick a career? And I gave that quite a bit of thought when we were going to talk today. And, the main advice I have is to know yourself. And so when I was trying to figure out how to choose my career, I realized a couple things about myself upon reflection, which is I need constant change. I can't do the same thing over and over, which is funny because my best friend is a tax accountant and my husband is a computer programmer. So obviously I marry and like the opposite. But understanding what it is about yourself that motivates you and is fulfilling is really important. So for me, that looked like either consulting or what we call brand management, because the assignments organically change and you don't have to continue to change your career. So that's how I got into the line of work I'm in, and just continue to attract assignments of turnarounds, even though it's maybe not what I would always choose. I tend to be working on those. And there's a second part to the question, Victoria, but now I've forgotten it. Could you please remind me?
Yeah. So what makes you most passionate about the work that you do? What kind of drives you in it?
Oh, sure. I love solving puzzles. So again, with this idea of knowing what you love and what you dislike and choosing work that looks like that. I love solving puzzles. I love working with people. And the line of work I'm in, I deal with hundreds of people a day. So it's a really interesting career from that standpoint. I was listening to a podcast one day about startups, and I find those podcasts to be highly informative. And the person who was talking said, if you're not sure where you belong, why don't you make a love-hate list? And just on a daily basis, what do you love? What do you hate? And it could be, I love getting up and drinking coffee, and I like to exercise, but I hate traffic, or, it doesn't have to be specifically about work. If you keep this record for about a week, you'll start to see some very common themes about yourself. And I think that applies as well when we're thinking about where we're going to find the most fulfillment and joy, is just truly knowing who you are as you start to pick that path.
Yeah, I love that. I love the love-hate list. I've actually read about those elsewhere, and I've heard they're super effective. Yeah, at finding trends in who you are. I'm really interested. So we talked about kind of like those trends. What has kept you inspired to be a change maker throughout your career? So have you had similar experiences that, you found points of inspiration that kind of motivated you along the way to actually be that change maker?
One of the most fulfilling things is to see a business that's declining finally turn around and grow. And because my background's in manufacturing, that means a product is on the shelf, some advertising maybe has been released, or we changed price, or the manifestation of the work is public. So, your friends and neighbors can see it. And to spend a turnaround is a grueling assignment. So normally it takes us anywhere from a year to 2 years, could be longer, but it's usually 1 to 2 years of intense work. And many moments of darkness where you think that it's not coming, the turnaround's not coming, we're doing all the right things, why aren't we getting there? And then you slowly start to get these little wins that you can celebrate at work and with the team, and you can congratulate your team, and then you really start to see it take off and fly. And it is so fun to walk into the office and be able to point to a chart that was going like this that now is going like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you do is so cool too, like turning around businesses that have been alive for a really long time and then are now on the decline. So I would imagine there's so much change making involved with that. I'm also wondering, if there have been certain aha moments throughout your career that have changed the way that you've thought about leadership. And it can be leadership within a project, or it can be leadership of a team.
Yeah, a few. One is actually parenthood. So after I had my daughter, I think it helped me understand how sensitive people are. And, in the beginning, I've always been a hard charger, but I think potentially I was a little too tough on people. Like, I have a really high standard for myself and others. But when I reflect on how I was leading other people, I could have led with more empathy. And that became more obvious to me after I had my daughter. And I realized sometimes even the smallest little thing, like a look of annoyance or just little things, can actually be picked up on and internalized by people. And so that helped me do a much better job around leading with empathy. Also, as your job gets a lot bigger, your body language is studied constantly. And so that's been something on my leadership journey that's been a true learning for me is, you spend a lot of time in your career wishing somebody would listen to you. And you're like, I'm trying to share my ideas with you. Nobody's listening. And then one day it flips and all of a sudden you've been promoted and you're in a leadership position and everybody's listening. And it's kind of that black and white. And then you realize, oh, I didn't mean that as direction. I was just sort of talking. And also you're human, right? So maybe you do have a sour look on your face, but it might be because you just thought about the 55 things you have to do after work. But the person you're talking to really thinks maybe it's about them. So that's been one piece of the personal journey. I think another thing that I've learned along the way is you have to be okay with making mistakes. And that's really hard. But the important part of the mistake is identifying what you did wrong and making sure you learn from it so that going forward you can be a stronger leader coming out of that. And I have plenty of failures to share if you want to dig into that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great to know. I won't make you dig into your failures. We have questions from the audience about that. But that's very cool. I love those lessons. I want to discuss leadership within the current environment with all of the spotlight that's being placed on social justice issues and COVID. I think it's really easy to lead when it's business as usual or when things are going well. But I'm curious as to what lessons you've seen or learned and what lessons you've seen other people learn from leaders leading within this time, and then how Serta Simmons has managed this internally throughout the course of the last several months.
Yeah, this has been a great space. So a couple lessons there. The first one is some of the people I work with. So our Chief Diversity Officer, he helped me realize that the number one thing we have to do is we just have to be okay talking about it. And I think that can be hard, especially for white people to talk about race. It's an uncomfortable topic. And, for a lot of people, you're afraid that you're going to do more harm when you discuss it, that you might say things that are insulting or your language might be misinterpreted. And what I've learned on the journey is the very best thing you can do is just be kind, respectful, and open, and ask questions and use your friends as a learning environment and a learning tool. And most of the time, they just really want to share with you where they're coming from and their perspective. And it helps you as a person, as a leader, as an organization take a step forward. So one of the things Serta Simmons did is we had a series of learning sessions sharing sessions where we just openly talked about some really, really tough issues. And most of them had nothing to do with mattresses and work, just really tough issues. And coming out of that, we identified a couple themes that we had a lot of people that needed some mentorship, wanted some coaching, wanted some sponsorship. And so we've set up those relationships for them in the organization to help them move forward.
Yeah, that's great. Do you feel like this is the last question that I'll ask before we open it up to audience questions because we already have some rolling in. But do you feel like that's changed the way that Serta Simmons is managing this, has changed the way that you lead as a result? And if so, kind of how has that changed your leadership style or the way that you approach things?
Yes, it has. Being more sensitive to how external events are affecting the employee population, it has been a key learning. So I actually happened to be on a personal vacation, and I hadn't had one for many months because of coronavirus, when the events of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the others transpired. And I was sitting in a restaurant with my little girls and my husband, and my cell phone rang from someone who's a little bit more junior on my team. She's a couple levels below me, 3 or 4. And my first reaction was, oh my gosh, what is wrong? Did somebody die? Or there must be some emergency here that Nikisha is calling me. So I stepped away from my dinner, and Nikisha was courageous enough to call me and say, everything's not okay. And I said, well, what is wrong? And she's like, Melanie, she's like, haven't you been watching the news? She goes, I'm really upset. And she goes, nobody at work has even stopped by to ask me, how are you doing? And, at that moment, I realized, I'm like, wow, I haven't done a good job as a leader being sensitive to how the events are affecting my employee population. We haven't done a great job with Nikisha and all the others that are upset by what's transpiring, and we haven't talked about it. And so she and I had a wonderful discussion, and she was one of the main people that helped us see what we needed to do to improve.
That's great. That's a great story. I feel like it's very relatable for a lot of people, not just leaders during this time. So yeah, that's a great story to hear. So I'm gonna go ahead and open it up to audience questions because I see some coming in. But I know that we did a poll to see kind of what our audience makeup is. So I want to share that with you going in because I think it'll kind of help.
That's great.
Yeah. And has that to our behind the scenes people, have the results of the poll come in, or are they still, otherwise we can ask one question and then mostly grad students. Okay. So mostly grad students, you can keep that in mind as you answer these questions. So the first question that we've got, there's naturally differences between company cultures. How have you maintained who you are in your leadership style throughout the different cultures that you have transitioned between while in senior roles? And then I think as a follow-up to that, as you've moved into more senior roles, has it become easier or harder to be who you truly are in those roles, and why?
Okay, I'm just going to write it down because sometimes so we've got the culture piece
absolutely.
and the more senior piece. Sure. So that's a great question. And one thing to screen for in your interviews, obviously, is culture, because you want to try to pick cultures that you fit into, because getting into the wrong one, is just going to make you very unhappy. But I have worked in a variety of different cultures. I've always tried to be myself, which is collaborative. I try to be very authentic. I'm very transparent. I'm direct. And, I'm pretty driven. My directness got me in trouble in one culture when I first stepped in, because I was too straightforward about things and people felt like it was, a little too straightforward. So I think the answer to the thing about the cultures is it's important to assess how things get done in your organization, and it's important to assess there's a right way of approaching people and a wrong way in a lot of cultures, and there's everything in between. But when you walk in, if you learn and study who the key decision makers are and how business transpires and decisions are made, you do need to flex into that type of the culture. However, I think you can be yourself as you embrace that. So, for example, my directness getting me in trouble, my workaround for that was I realized that I needed to take a couple steps and soft land my message a few times before I could say it directly. So a few extra steps were required. As you get more senior, one of the benefits you have as you get more senior is you get to establish some of the culture yourself. So I think that gives you more freedom of how you want to run your department, because you can kind of establish what you're like and what you bring to the table. Again, you still need to ladder back up into the top level of the company and how they're leading. Again, I would say it's a little bit of a blend. So hopefully that's a good enough answer. Things I try to avoid is I try to help remove barriers from my team.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have the final results of the poll. It looks like 41% grad students, 35 faculty staff, 12% undergrads, and 6% future Georgia Tech MBAs. So, or future Georgia Tech students. Okay, so the next question I've got is, how do you think your change experience in business applies to contributing to business organization changes and societal changes in areas that have garnered new urgency? I can repeat that for you.
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. How do you think your change experience in business applies to contributing to business organizational changes and societal changes in areas that have garnered new urgency?
Sure. Yes, I think the question is there, how do you apply your change agent personality to drive other change? That's how I'm interpreting it. And what I've learned about change is, again, everybody has a different way that they drive it. For me, change looks like creating a platform and a vision that people can sign up to, and I get enough support that I can move my initiatives forward. And so I've learned how to do that in an organization and in different cultures. And the way I apply that externally would be a similar way, which is who are the people and what are the resources I need to go drive that change, and how do we impact it? And I think also, similar to when you have a mission and vision in a company, you need to stay true to what it is you're trying to accomplish. So therefore, me as a leader, based on the skills I have and the areas where I have the most passion, I'm going to be more effective in some of those areas than others. So I tend to choose those as places where I can have more impact.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I've got also, I know you mentioned that you had kind of a few failures that you would be happy to share. And it looks like we have a question around those. So would you be open to sharing some of your failures that have propelled you forward into your career?
Oh yeah, there's so many. Here, I'll give you two. One of my favorite ones, which was also just terrible, but one of my favorite ones is when I became a director, I started working for a female who's Italian. And I've worked with a lot of people from a lot of different cultures and countries, that it was the first time I had reported to somebody that wasn't an American. And so she's from Italy, and off the bat, we had a culture problem. But the mistake I made is I didn't even understand that that's what our issue was. So what happened was, she was very passionate, and what you would expect. She also spoke very strongly. I love, I hate, and so there was lots of strong language being used all the time. And I'm pretty mild, so it felt kind of abrasive sometimes, and it felt a little all over the place. And then in terms of getting her alignment, she really didn't want to be challenged in a group setting. You could challenge her, but she really preferred if that conversation happened one-on-one. And I was just used to a different environment where we would put it on the table and talk about it as a group. And so I had many public failures with her where she felt like I was being disrespectful. And it took a while for me to sort of sort out what was the right way to work with her, and also identify that we just had some cultural barriers. And once I realized, okay, this is the right way to approach her, we became the best of friends, and she's, to this day, someone who still sponsors me. But it was pretty traumatic because I got the worst performance review.
Oh, no.
I went through quite a few things before I sort of sorted out, what exactly the issues were there. So when you face something that just isn't going well, I think it's important to just take a step back and try to identify what's broken. I found out the what's broken by asking some of my teammates. I'm like, how did you work with her? And I'm like, what mistakes am I making? And they had a pretty long list for me.
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
And then maybe something nearer and dearer to all of you, just based on where you are in your career, is that I had a lot of trouble interviewing when I was in grad school. And so I went into my interviews thinking that I was awesome and I was confident and I was going to land these interviews. 7 interviews in, no job offers. I realized I wasn't doing very well. And, that was a tough thing to admit. And also kind of blown all my chances. I happened to be in school trying to achieve an internship right after September 11th. So the amount of opportunities was very small. And I had I had missed all of those. So what I did was, I first of all, I had to go seek help on what was wrong with my interviewing. And it turned out that I wasn't really communicating what I'm great at. So I didn't know my strengths very well. And I didn't have a clear story when I walked in that interview. So they weren't even really sure what it is I wanted to do. So once I understood, what am I good at? What's my story? The interviewing went a lot better. But to recover, I actually had to do quite a bit of homework. I ended up making a list of 100 companies and cold calling them every Friday until I finally found a job. It took like 3 months.
That's awesome. Well, that's not awesome, but that's great advice for the people on this call. I'm sure so many people, especially right now, it's recruiting season. That's advice that we can all kind of take. So that's great to hear.
Yeah. Videotape yourself. Have someone help you.
Yeah, that's very good feedback. The next question I've got is your company change practices to address inequities, especially those associated with race?
Yes, I think I understand that one. We are working through that. So we have a variety of initiatives. We are looking at gender equality. We are looking at pay equality across everybody. So instead of searching for a specific gender or race or anything like that, we actually set aside the demographics and look across levels to make sure that we have pay equity. And we have found several instances where we did not. So we've been going in and correcting those. And then I believe one of the biggest things holding back females and minorities is lack of sponsorship and mentorship, that you just don't get this organic coaching. And it really, really sets you pretty far behind. And so because that's a huge premise of what I believe in my particular department, and we're trying to roll it out company-wide too, we just need a few more resources. We're really focused on anyone that would like mentorship, that we put programs in place for them to create that opportunity.
That's great. That's awesome to hear. I also have another question. My chat is kind of going all over the place. So sustainability is a topic near and dear to our Net Impact group. What are some of the innovations that Serta Simmons Bedding is leading to make the mattress industry more sustainable?
I love that you asked that question. So we just launched our first sustainable product line this year. It's under the Beautyrest brand. It's called Harmony Luxe. And every queen size mattress has the equivalent of 50 plastic water bottles of plastic saved and recycled out of the ocean. So it's an ocean cleanup project. Yeah. And with that, we've kind of adopted the turtle as our brand ambassador. And so we are using this partnership with Sequel to clean up the ocean. We think we'll remove anywhere from 5 million to 8 million plastic bottles out of the ocean this year. And then probably interesting for many of you, based on the fact that we're in the school that we're talking to here, we have a lot of initiatives around different types of sustainable and biodegradable components. So biodegradable foams, other sustainable materials. It's been a really rich space for us. So you're going to see a lot more innovation there.
That is awesome. Very cool. It's something you don't expect to hear necessarily from, a mattress firm. Right. So that's really cool. That's very interesting. I've also got a question around lessons that you've learned as a leader. So what are some of the lessons from your career that you would want to share, especially if you don't mind reflecting on being a woman in a male-dominated line of business? So actually being a woman and lessons there.
Sure. Yeah. It can be hard to be a woman. It can be hard to be the only person who's not a white male. So, you can even step it back to that. And I have had a good portion of my career where I'm the only one like me in the room. So I can identify with all of you that have been in that situation where you just feel different and unique. And, I think a couple things. One is you have to know the game you're playing. So if the game is run by a certain group, if it's run by white males, or just even think about the corporate culture of what it means to get ahead, understand what those ground rules are, and then you have to learn how to be yourself and function within them. So what that looks like for me is I still bring me to the meeting, but I might dress in a way that fits that audience, right? So if I'm with, like when I go to a board meeting and it's all 50 and 60-year-old white males, I wear a suit and I put my hair up because that is not the time for the ripped jeans and more casual look. But if I'm working with my team and I want to identify more closely to the fact that I have a lot younger people on my team, then I do try to dress differently to fit in a little bit better and make them more comfortable. The other thing about being just yourself is you really represent an entire population. So there's a lot of pressure on the one that's in the room to do well, because if you fail, unfortunately, you're making it a little bit harder for the ones like you to come behind you. So I always think about extra preparation, walking in there. What am I going to do to show up and really represent and pave the way to get more diversity in that room, and how do I champion that?
Yeah, I love that. That's all too true. I think anybody who's been the only person in the room of their kind kind of can realize that. So I have another question about networking. So could you address the significance of networking to your success?
It's absolutely critical to have a strong network. It's how I got the job I'm in now. That becomes more important the more senior you get, because the jobs are harder there's less of them and they're harder to get. The networking will open up a lot of opportunities, as well as if you're open to learning. The other thing that's really powerful about networking is people can give you advice if you're seeking it. I'm not very strong at this. Can you help me with this? I had this, problem at work. I didn't know how to talk to my boss or present this material. All of those things pay off tremendously. And then, what you really need is someone to help sponsor you when those discussions come up around who might be the next person selected for an assignment.
Yeah, definitely. I like thinking about networking as more than just trying to get the job, but once you're in the job, that sponsorship piece of it, because that's so important. Sure. The next question I've got is, how do you deal with uncertainty, or the uncertainty that comes with change? What have you found is the best way to lead your team through uncertainty?
Well, that's been pretty much all of my assignments. And so the first thing is the leader has to be comfortable with ambiguity and being in gray space. And if that makes you highly uncomfortable, you might want to consider a slight role shift into something that feels better for you. So I'm personally okay with not knowing, and for being aware that things could just change in an instant. What I have learned is helpful for the team, though, is you need to manage your emotions. So they need a leader that doesn't show it on their face. You need to show up looking confident, looking like you're not rattled, and you need to kind of keep the happy face. So either you're neutral or you're happy. You cannot be showing those other emotions, because it really, really disturbs the team a lot. So that's got to manage your emotions. The second thing is I think it's okay to tell them where you are. So I'm honest with my team about where we are, but then I always try to provide a picture of where we're going. So even if it's not crystal clear, I will at least tell them the steps to get to know where we're going, or somehow provide them a plan of this is how we're going to work through it and solve it. And then the last part is a lot of people just need a pat on the back. You're doing a good job. Hang in there. Recognize that they're working overtime. Recognize that they made a contribution. Recognize that they didn't have dinner with their family that night because they were stuck with you. Whatever the sacrifice happens to be, that does a lot for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are 3 really solid leadership tips. I've got another question about the podcast that you mentioned. So you mentioned listening to startup podcasts. Mm-hmm. What are some of your favorite things to read or listen to when you want to get inspired or stay current?
Yeah, I love books. So I'm still stuck on books, but you could use Audible or other things if you like to listen to books. Depending on the type of work you're in, select some things that you think are interesting, and then select some things that maybe challenge your views. So I work in a big company, and this company is the smallest of all the companies I've been in. So I've always been in, multi-billion dollar companies, multinationals. And so I've been listening to Startup Nation podcast because they do it completely different than us. So I think listening to someone that's on the flip side is interesting. I'm a big believer in your strengths. So I think learning what your strengths are, and there's different ways you go about that, is really helpful. It's helpful to understand your weaknesses and round them out. So that's another place to kind of go seek information or learn. As a business person is more businessy. So if you're more into science or engineering, you probably need to calibrate this feedback. But what are the things your peers are listening to and reading? So, for me, that looks like Bloomberg News, Wall Street Journal, other formats of where I'm going to get financial information. And then the last thing is history is a great predictor of the future. So studying some history can really kind of help you get there. And that could be any type of history. It could be actual history around a country or history of like Lego's reinvention, again, kind of coming back to whatever your focus is in your career.
Yeah, I love that. I love how well-rounded that answer was. You have like kind of a little bit of everything, the industry stuff, the personal stuff, something that challenges you. I love that. So I've got another question. How do you use analytics to drive operations and innovations in manufacturing? Can you share some cool stats?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I feel like maybe you work at our company because we just made some progress in this area. We have been using data and analytics to understand how much innovation we can actually create on an annual basis. And that's been a really hard conversation for us. So how many full-time employees does it take to make a new mattress with a new chemical in the fabric versus a complete new line? And those are hard questions to answer. So we have been using our data and analytics to better understand where people are spending their time, to get visibility into how many projects we're doing, to understand when we've completed a project, did we make any money? Did we lose money? We had set KPIs for ourselves in the beginning. Did we achieve any of those? So et cetera, et cetera. An example of what that data has done for us is we recently realized that half of our time was being spent on projects that we don't think are that value added to the company. And so we sat down and we were like, whoa, we need to have a new strategy for how we're going to conduct business in our department if half of our time is being spent on something we don't think is a good use of our time. So we recently reset our whole approach to innovation and shortened the amount of time we're going to spend on this one area that we said was not strategic.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Those are super interesting pieces to hear. I've also got another question. In the emerging new normal, what has been your toughest leadership test yet? How do you prepare yourself and your company during these times?
Stamina has been the toughest because I'm hearing this from everybody that the workday doesn't turn off right now. And our company went through some tough times when retail environment closed. We saw our sales go down 70%. So that was a little scary. So we basically had to kind of shut the company down. So that took a tremendous amount of overtime to close the company. And then for 6 weeks we were, what's our new business model? So then we were scrambling for a new business model. And we did some really cool things during that time. We donated 10,000 mattresses as relief beds to New York City because there was hospital overflow. Yeah, we did some really great stuff. And then magically started selling all kinds of mattresses again. So now we're like, now we're selling more than we sold last year. So like, okay, now we got to hurry up and restart the company. So the stamina piece has been the most difficult because myself and my team were working much, much more overtime than we ever did. So what we did this week is we had a very honest conversation among ourselves of how do we get our lives back in order? There's actually a class you can take called Take Back Your Life. I don't think it's quite that bad yet, but we were talking about how do we take back our life. And we realized that when you don't physically commute, you lose some of your boundaries, and we have to put those boundaries back in place.
Absolutely. I think everybody's relating to that one right now, for sure. So We're going to ask all of our speakers this at the end of the chat, but I'm really curious as to one kind of call to action that you'd like to leave the audience with when it comes to how to widen our understanding of the important issues around diversity and inclusion, race, and social justice.
Find someone with a different viewpoint than you or who comes from a different experience and just sit down and talk to them and ask them. So I have a really close friend, Ayana, who is African American, and we've been friends for a long time. And I realized after I'd had that experience with Nikisha and at work, I'm like, I've never just sat down and asked Ayana what it's like for her specifically as a Black female in the workplace. And we'd had discussions about it, but we hadn't really talked about it.
Yeah.
And so my advice is have that conversation because it's going to be enlightening, and I bet you'll leave with some ideas on other things you could do.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I think more people are having those conversations, and they're so important to have. I just had one final question come in from the audience, so I'm going to squeeze this last one in, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But how do you balance personal life? So being a mom and a wife, having hobbies, etc., with being a C-suite leader. Do you believe that balance exists, or does that look differently in today's COVID world?
Well, it's all about trade-offs and what you're comfortable with and the choices you want to make. And I think balance is a tough one. You need to find what works for you. Those would be my words. And I had this one time I was put through an exercise that said you can only be 5 things in life. You can only choose 5 roles. Well, I've never been able to pick 5. I think I'm still at 7 or 8. But it's a good exercise because it's like, well, one role is being a mother, one role is being a spouse, one role is being an employee. Then maybe it's you want to exercise, so you have a fitness role. You need to take care of a parent or someone, and you very quickly get to well more than 5. The point of the exercise is you have to make choices. So if you want to be all in on your career, you're going to have to pull back somewhere else. What that means for me is I don't have much of a social life. So my life looks like work. It looks like my children and my husband, and just a small bit of time for myself where I try to exercise, and really almost nothing else fits in. I'm really comfortable with my choices, but obviously, I've had to give up some other things. And so I think you just need to pick what works for you and pick a job at a level that fits your lifestyle and what you want.
Yeah, I think that's important to kind of prioritize, to know what's important and find that balance. As we wrap up, or before I officially wrap up and hand things back over to Dory for closing remarks, is there anything that I or the audience didn't ask you that you want to share with us? And it's totally fine if not, but I wanted to give you the opportunity if there was anything you wanted to talk about today that we didn't.
On the topic of diversity and inclusion, it kind of circles around the outside edge of it, but there can be a lot of bullies at work, and you would think bullies go away because you're an adult and that's like a kid thing. Yeah. But it's not true. They still exist as you get older. And so the one thing I was thinking about in preparation for this talk was around, when you feel like you're being mistreated in any way, what's the right approach? And I have found consistently, I don't like those situations. I don't think anybody does. It always takes me a while to build up enough courage to just literally walk over there and talk to that person and confront the behavior. And every single time that I've had that conversation with someone where it really wasn't going well and I felt like someone was being too aggressive with me, every single time we got to a great place and the relationship continued and actually grew and prospered afterwards. So that was probably the one thing we didn't talk about that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's great. I love closing in that way too, because it's like something that everybody at every level is going to experience and probably very relevant to people on this call. So thank you so much for your time. I will go